Knitting has taken the world by storm. Suddenly, friends, family, that one person that you went to high school with, everyone is knitting. And maybe you're thinking, that's kind of cool. Maybe I want to learn how to knit too. Well, look no further. This is How to Start Knitting as a Complete Beginner, or Knitting 101. I'm obviously biased, but I think knitting is super fun. It keeps you really present in the current moment. You're making something with your hands, and at the end of your work, you have tangible proof of your efforts. And it's very meditative for me because of the repetitiveness. I love how much depth there is to this craft because yes, it is a craft, and you're constantly learning, whether it's a new pattern, a new stitch, or you're just working with a yarn that you've never worked with before. There will be 3 parts to this video, so feel free to skip around depending on what you are interested in. I'll have timestamps below, or if you're completely new, you should probably stick around and watch the whole thing. Okay, so let's get into it. Part 1, materials. The first thing you need, obviously, is yarn. The one suggestion I will make is to not buy acrylic yarn. Acrylic yarn is basically just plastic, and if you're making anything at all that's not decorative, you probably don't want acrylic. So my suggestions are either wool or cotton to start. Some examples of some good beginner yarns are Cascade 128 or 220. Rios Malabrigo is also really nice, but you can always go to your local yarn store and ask them what a good beginner yarn to work with would be. You should be asking for a worsted weight yarn, and 100 grams is more than enough for the project that I'll be guiding you through. So I have some yarn here. This is Cascade 128. I'm going to talk really briefly about different weights of yarn, but I'm not going to go into it too much because it's kind of complicated. But basically there are different weights or sizes of yarn that you can work with. For example, this is a project that I'm working on right now, which is a little Sophie scarf, which you might have heard of because they're really popular right now. And I'm using 2 strands of mohair together. As you can see, this is an extremely fine yarn, and this is what it's knitting up like. So this is an example of a super lightweight yarn. And then you have something somewhere in the middle. So as you can see, this is thicker. You can also have super bulky jumbo yarns. So there's a huge range of different types of yarn, and a good way to find out the yarn weight and the needle size that you're looking for is to look at the label. So what we're going to be using today is one step above a worsted. It's a bulky weight, which is what a Cascade 128 is. So the label will tell you 128 superwash. Superwash just means that you can actually put this in the wash, and it is 100% superwash merino wool. And then here, if you look at the back of the label, it'll say what size it is. So this is a 5 bulky. It tells you it's 100 grams, which is how much this weighs. This one isn't actually 100 grams because I have it left over, but you can weigh your yarn and see how much you have left. And then you want to look for this. So it says US 10, 6 millimeters. So that tells you that you're looking for a size US 10 needle, which for this one, I'm going to be using a 10.5 just because I don't have a 10 needle, and 10.5 works fine. But usually you want to go based off of that recommendation for your needle size. Which brings us to the second thing that you need. So you need needles. There are all sorts of needles out there. There are metal needles, wood needles, interchangeables, circulars, double pointed needles, but we're gonna start with circulars because I think that is the best thing to start with as a beginner. These are the needles that I'll be using today. I am using a 10.5 because I don't have 10s, and this is 24 inches total. So that's from the tip of the needle to the other tip of the needle, including the loop. So this is what makes needles circular, is if they have this little loop that's connected on both ends. So you're looking for a size 10 or whatever your yarn label recommends. And then these are 24 inches, which is more than long enough for the project that we're going to be doing. But I think 24 inches is usually like a good size to have. And finally, you will need a darning needle, which looks like this. So it looks like a normal needle that's bigger, and then it also has this little point at the end. It's bigger than like a sewing needle, for example, but you'll need one of these to finish and weave in the ends once we're done with our project. Okay, let's move on to part 2, which is tools and other helpful things. One thing I really recommend is having a notebook or post-it notes or anything that you can write on. You can also keep track on your phone, but one of the reasons that I love knitting so much is the fact that it gets me off of my phone. So I really recommend having a physical way to keep track of your progress. And a notebook and pen and paper is the easiest way for me to do that. So the second thing that we're gonna need is a pattern. There is a website, it's called Ravelry. You might have heard of it. It's this amazing website where there are a ton of patterns to use. There are free patterns, but you can also buy patterns for purchase and support pattern designers. Some good beginner projects are coasters, dishcloths, pot holders. Some people will say to start with a scarf, but I think it's actually good to start with something smaller so that you can get that achievement happiness right away, that little dopamine hit in your brain, and you can make something that's really cute and practical and simple. I'm also going to really briefly tell you how to read a pattern that you're looking to maybe purchase on Ravelry. So the first thing that you're going to look for is the yarn weight. You can click on the little question mark next to the yarn weight, and Ravelry will pull up a little table of the different yarn weights and sizes so that you can look for it. And this is what you're looking for when you're looking at those yarn labels. You're looking for, in this case, a DK weight. And then you're looking for the needle size. So it'll probably give you guidelines on what type of needles you should buy. In this case, you need US 4 or 3.5 millimeter needles. So depending on what size you're making, there'll be a range in the yardage. So in this example, from 101 to 140 yards. So it depends on what size you're making. The small size, you'll only need 101 yards of the yarn. In the largest size, you'll need 140 yards. And again, it'll tell you that on the back of the label, right next to the grams. It'll say 100 grams / 128 yards. So for this yarn, you could make a small or a medium, but you wouldn't be able to make a large. Unironically, another tool that you will need is YouTube. YouTube has so many good tutorials out there, and literally any problem that you run into, someone has probably experienced that problem and put up a YouTube video on how to fix that mistake. Also, if you're looking for how to do certain stitches, it's really great for that. If you need to learn how to cast on, if you have dropped a stitch, YouTube is there to help you. And there are tons of tutorials. They're very great and helpful. And I found that the knitting community is very supportive, which is really nice. And the final thing that you'll need is patience. Unironically, yes, you will need a lot of patience because knitting can be super fun, but also it can be frustrating, which I think is important to talk about. Part of learning how to knit is learning how to roll with the mistakes and persevere and figure out how to fix the mistakes that have come up. And just to remember, if you are a complete beginner, or even if you've knitted before and you've taken a break, it's okay to make mistakes as a beginner and learn. That is literally part of the process. Also, a quick note, there are so many different notions, which are knitting accessories that you can purchase, but I would recommend not purchasing them until you're sure that you, first of all, like knitting and want to keep doing it, but also you don't want to buy a bunch of stuff if you're not actually going to use it, because there are some notions that other people find super helpful that I don't personally need, but there are common things like stitch markers, row counters that can be really great and helpful. And I'm going to do a whole other video on everything I have in my knitting kit, so subscribe if you want to see that too. That'll be coming out soon. Okay, so now we're all set up. We have our yarn, we have our needles, we have our pattern, which brings us to part 3. Let's start knitting. Okay, so the first thing that we need to learn how to do is a long tail cast on. So as you can see, here's the ball of yarn. I just took one end out and I'm gonna do a long tail cast on. You can do any type of cast on that you want to, but this is just how I learned. So basically what you wanna do is you want to loop the yarn over. If you can see here, the long tail that's not attached to anything is on top. And then this end is connected to the ball of yarn over here. So you're just making a little loop. So again, a little loop like this. This is connected over here. And then you want to put this behind and you pull through this little loop right here. And as you can see, you just made a little knot. So I'm going to do it again. So again, this tail is on top. You cross it over the back, and then you're pulling up through this little loop right here, like that. I'll just show one more time. Okay, so you loop over. Again, this is the end of the yarn that's on top. You cross it over the back, and then you're pulling up through here. Okay, so now we have our little loop, This is our very first cast on stitch, and you can just kind of adjust it to be the correct size for the needle. You want to make sure that the long tail is on the front of the needle. So this is the front of the needle, this is the back. And we're gonna cast on a couple more stitches because for this little coaster, we're just gonna cast on 10 stitches. So again, this is the top of the yarn. This is the back connected to the ball of yarn. And we're gonna put our thumb and our pointer finger in between the two pieces. So again, we're gonna put our thumb and our pointer finger in between the two. And then we're gonna put our needle up, over, back, and that is cast on the second stitch. So I'll do it again. So again, your pointer finger and your thumb go between. You're gonna go under your thumb and over your pointer finger, and that's 3. This can be a little bit tricky at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy to do, and you'll just kind of get a rhythm with it. So that's 3 stitches. We're gonna cast on 10 to start. So I'm gonna keep going here. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we did 20 cast on stitches, as you can see here, and we still have this tail over here. You want it to be somewhat long because eventually we're gonna weave in this end. So you want it to be long enough that you can weave it in comfortably. Okay, so now we have our stitches cast on. Okay, so now we need our other needle over here. Again, this is the tail of the yarn, so that's gonna be on the back, and then on the front is going to be your yarn that's connected to your ball still. So there are many different ways of knitting and purling. There's English, there's continental, there's a lot of different styles of knitting, but this is just the knitting that I learned how to do from my grandma, who was the one who taught me to knit and crochet when I was probably 10 or 12 maybe. Okay, so we're gonna start with our very first knit stitch. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in the front of this first loop. You can see this loop here. We're gonna go into that first loop. We're gonna take the yarn that's connected to the ball here, and we're gonna wrap it around the top of this needle. So again, you can see this first loop here. We're going here, around, and then we're gonna pull this needle through and take that stitch off. And that is the first knitted stitch. So then we're gonna do the same thing with the second. We're gonna put that through. We're gonna wrap the yarn around. We're going to pull that through and then pull the stitch off. So that's our second one. So it might be really slow at first, and that's okay. It takes a long time to sort of get used to the motion. But again, we have this little loop here. We'll go through the front of the loop. We'll wrap the yarn around, and then you pull back, and then you pull the stitch off. So I'm just gonna keep doing that for the rest of the stitches. And one tip that I have is to not knit too tightly. So in the beginning, a lot of people knit really tightly, and to be fair, I kind of knit tightly when I was casting this on, but it's more helpful to knit looser at the beginning because you can really see your stitch pattern and it's easier to follow along. Okay, and this is our final stitch on the first row. So when you only knit across, it's called a garter stitch. So I'm just gonna knit the second row so that you can kind of see how it'll turn out. And the good thing about these coasters is that you can just make them however big you want them. If you wanna make a tiny little coaster, you know, you can cast on like half the width of this, 10 stitches instead of 20, and just make a little one. And then you can make it however tall you want to as well. But yeah, I just think it's really cute and like a fun little project to start with to feel confident in your knitting abilities. And it's very simple, and it kind of just helps you get used to knitting. Okay, so as you can see, the pattern is sort of starting to form. These are called garter ridges. So you can see there's like a little bump here with these stitches, and those are garter ridges. And you can see them on the back as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna swap and show you how to do a purl stitch. So there are knit stitches and there are purl stitches. So for a purl stitch, we wanna keep our yarn in front. That's a good way to remember. So again, we're gonna go through this first loop. Instead of how we went through with the knit stitch, which was like this, we're going to actually hold our yarn that's connected to our ball in front, and then we're gonna put our needle in front like this. So we're gonna put the needle in the front like that. We're gonna again wrap around the needle, and then we're gonna pull through and pull the stitch off. So again, we're gonna hold the yarn. The yarn is in the front instead of in the back, like with knitting. We're gonna put it through the front. We're gonna wrap around, and then we're gonna pull this through. And I'll just do that again a little bit slower. So again, through the front loop here, wrap around, and then pull that stitch off. So these are the two most basic stitches that you can do. It's a knit stitch or a purl stitch. And again, people have different ways of knitting, they have different ways of purling, but this is just how I learned. So that's how I knit and purl. Okay, so that is a line of purling done. I'm gonna make a smaller coaster and show y'all how to bind off correctly. Okay, so I cast on 10 stitches. I'm just knitting these 10 stitches. I'll probably just do like a little 10 by 10 just to show you. Also, these are wood needles. Some people have a preference for wood or metal. I actually bought mostly wood, but then I tried a metal set and I realized I like that way better. So if I ever buy interchangeable needles, I'll probably buy the metal set. Okay, so this is a very, very small coaster. It's a mini coaster, if you will, but I just wanted to show you how to cast off and then also how to weave in your ends. So we're going to go ahead and cast off. Again, there are different ways of doing this, but this is just the way that I learned. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit as we normally would. We're going to knit 2. So knit 2. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull this first stitch over the second. So we're going to hook our needle up underneath. We're just going to pull it over the top of the second, and then we only have 1 stitch left and we've cast off that 1 stitch. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to knit till we have 2 stitches on the needle, and again we're going to pull that first stitch over top of that second stitch. As you can see on the top, it's really cleanly been cast off, which is nice. So we're just going to continue doing that. We're going to knit as we normally would. And then we're going to pull that stitch over the other. And we're just going to keep doing this until the end, until we've cast off all of our stitches. Pull that one over, knit, pull over. And for different projects, if you have a different pattern, for example, some patterns will say knit 1, purl 1, you'll knit 1 and then you'll purl the next one. So you want to cast off in pattern. But for this one, because they're all knit stitches, we're just knitting. We're just continuing to knit and then pulling over that stitch. Okay, so now we get to the end. So again, we're going to knit as we normally would. I'm going to knit this, and then we're going to pull this one over top. And then what we're going to do is you just continue pulling here. So we'll just pull this, And then we'll snip the edge. About like this much is probably enough. So we'll just snip right there, and you just pull this tail all the way through. So now you have your two ends, and you want to weave these in so that they're just not hanging off the edges. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our darning needle and we're gonna loop this through here. And then there are different ways of weaving in the ends for different stitch types, for different stitch patterns, but what I'm going to do is the one for a garter stitch. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go up through, this is a frowny, we're gonna call it, and this one's a smiley. So you're gonna go up through a frowny, and then up through a smiley, and basically we're gonna follow the line of this garter ridge. So then we're gonna go down here, through here, and then we're gonna go back through that first ridge. So we're gonna do the same thing again. We're gonna go up here, up through this line, up through the next, and then down here and down back through that frowny. Again, up, through, over here, and then down that smiley face, down back through over here. Up, and down, and then down. And as you can see, it's really hard to actually tell that that has been weaved in, and you can just snip it, I mean, kind of wherever you want. I don't usually weave in too much of my ends, and then you can just kind of like zhuzh it to make sure it fits correctly. But yeah, that's the really cool thing about this way of weaving it in, is you basically can't tell that it's been woven in, which is awesome, and it follows the pattern. Okay, and then we're just gonna do the other side really quickly too. Amazing, now you have the world's tiniest little coaster. You can put a little salt grinder on it. And yeah, you can make these as big as you want to, so you can make them 20 stitches wide, which will probably give you a nice size coaster for a mug, or you can make little mini ones if you want to. It's really up to you. But yeah, look how cute that is. And you officially knitted something. Yay! If you made it all the way here to the end, thank you so much for watching. I did want to talk really quickly about some extras that I didn't mention, but that are important. You'll hear about blocking. This is more relevant when it comes to knitted garments, so I'm thinking sweaters, vests, camis. Blocking is where you take your piece and you wet it down. Sometimes you add a little bit of wool wash, which is specifically meant for wool. You can't use everyday normal detergents because it'll strip it, and that's not what you want. So you will get it wet, and then you will lay it out on these tiles and stretch it to be the correct size, because wool has this kind of memory. So if you stretch it to be the correct size, then it'll stay similar to that size. Again, this is something that's more advanced, and you don't even have to worry about it really when you're doing scarves or hats, things like that. Really, it's only about garments that you're gonna wear where the fit really matters. There are also different types of stitches. So today we learned the most basic, which is knit and purl. And while those are the basics, there are technically more types of stitches. There are yarn overs, make one right, make one left, knit two together. And again, YouTube is really great for if you don't know how to do these types of stitches. Another thing to mention is gauge. You'll hear this, and you'll even see on the back of a label where it'll say 14 stitches equals 4 inches. Gauge is also important when it comes to sweaters, camis, things like that. And basically it means that you should be knitting a certain number of stitches within a certain size. 10 stitches equals 4 inches means that you should be able to look at your piece and there should be 10 stitches in 4 inches. And there are adjustments that you can make if you're not getting gauge, and this is why a lot of people recommend that if you are gonna knit something like a sweater, you do a gauge swatch. So you will essentially knit just a little tiny square, kind of similar to what we did today, and you will measure out and see if you are making gauge. Some people even go so far as to wash and block their little gauge swatch so that you have a better idea of what the sweater is actually gonna look like. Otherwise, you can end up with a sweater that doesn't fit right, is way too big or way too small, and you might be really confused because you'll say, well, I used the right needles, I used the right size yarn, but some people knit tighter and some people knit looser, and that can really affect how the gauge turns out. And then finally, I just wanted to put a little PSA out there to support your local yarn store if you can. I know it may not be in budget for some people and you may just have to buy yarn off of Michael's or wherever else, but it is really so nice to go into your local yarn store. You can find someone to help you with patterns, with the yarn, with needles, especially as a beginner when you have a lot of questions, and it's just great to shop locally and support local businesses. Okay, I think that's it for this video. I hope that you learned something new. I hope that it wasn't too overwhelming, and I hope that it got you excited about knitting because I really love to knit, and it's honestly brought me a lot of joy to be making really cool items and learning new things and working with my hands. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you want me to make any other videos related to knitting, please let me know. I will try and make them. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching. Okay, I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!